city and county of Philadelphia. My name is Michael Cord, and I'm working with attorney Willie Nattil in connection with this matter. And this matter is actually bigger than what we had expected. This matter has expanded to much more than just a private criminal complaint. In fact, in the last 24 hours, in fact, in the last 60 minutes or so, there have been some developments in terms of our communications with other active participants in this, including attorneys for the three young men, Dwayne Dyches, Brian Hall, and Pete Hopkins. We've had communications with the attorneys for those three young men. We've also been in touch with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And based on those conversations, we decided that instead of simply focusing on a private criminal complaint right here, right now, in regard to the officers who brutally assaulted Dwayne Dyches, Brian Hall, and Pete Hopkins, we will expand this matter, not only to protect their interest, but to protect the interest of all young black men in Philadelphia, all men in Philadelphia, all women in Philadelphia, all children in Philadelphia. So we're here to announce that our decision is to go beyond a private criminal complaint. This decision was made within the last several minutes, in fact, based on communications with all the pertinent players. What we will do at this point will be stronger than we had initially planned. It'll be more expansive than we had initially planned. We want to protect everybody who could be victimized by what has happened in this case. We all know what happened back on May 5, 2008. It was Philadelphia's version of the Rodney King beating. It was the grand jury's version of the Simi Valley trial jury. In other words, they said to us, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? Before I introduce the other attorney, Willie Nattil, let me just spend a minute talking about the injustice that took place here. We all know this past Thursday, the grand jury report was publicly announced, and everybody heard it, and a lot of folks saw it. And many folks were outraged with the grand jury, as they should have been. But the grand jury was not the only demon in this. The grand jury was not the only devil in this. What do I mean by that? The grand jury, as all grand juries in Pennsylvania, was an investigative grand jury. Investigative grand juries do not handle cases like this. Investigative grand juries investigate. They're normally involved in political corruption cases. They're normally involved in organized crime cases. In other words, you suspect crime, but you don't have enough evidence. So you put together, you impanel a grand jury, and the grand jury has subpoena powers. They'll call in secretaries. They'll call in drivers. They'll call in assistants. They'll call in folks who are peripherally connected to the case and subpoena those folks so that they can get some information. And once they get that information based on that investigation, they take it to the district attorney's office and say, you ought to prosecute the following folks on the following crimes. But damn it, what was the reason for an investigation here? You saw the videotape. There was nothing to investigate. Attorneys like me and like Willie Nattil, who handle criminal cases, we know that all the prosecution has to do is to allege a crime and allege a victim. They do that in the preliminary hearing, and the case is then held for trial and goes to court. Well, in this case, you had more than any basic preliminary hearing. You had the crime, the kicking, the beating, the stomping, the brutality, the assault. You had the criminals, the officers who were involved. In fact, the ones who were specifically sanctioned by the police commissioner. So you got the crime, you got the criminals, it's all on videotape. What is there to investigate? The fact that the DA passed the buck to the grand jury was to get her off the hook, to step back and say, hey, it wasn't me, it was the grand jury. It was a trick. And the wool was pulled over the eyes of the black community in Philadelphia and all residents of Philadelphia. And that's why Willie Nattil and I became so outraged. That's why the Dyches family reached out to Willie Nattil and I and said, we're mad as hell, and we got to do something about it because we just ain't going to take it anymore. So you can go ahead and blame the grand jury. They are blameworthy. The grand jury saw a crime and ignored it. But the bigger bad guy in this thing is the district attorney of the city and county of Philadelphia for passing the buck when she didn't have to. She saw the tape like we saw the tape. She saw the crime like we saw the crime. She saw the criminals like we saw the criminals. Right. But now she's off the hook, or at least she thought she was. That's why Willie Natil and I looked into this private criminal complaint. That's why we talked to the defense attorneys about their 1983 civil rights lawsuit. That's why we contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office. So this thing has become much bigger and much better than a private criminal complaint involving these three young men, Dwayne Deitches, Brian Hall, and Pete Hopkins. Let me now introduce Willie Lee Natil Jr.